List with Elizabeth show, ready to go live in 3, 2.
When you think selling and buying a home. When I think real estate, I think List with Elizabeth. Elizabeth Kline. Elizabeth Ann Kline. And here is the host of the List with Elizabeth show, Elizabeth Kline.
Hello. Welcome back to the List with Elizabeth show. Thanks for tuning in once again. My name is Elizabeth Ann Kline. I am the host of the List with Elizabeth show, talking all things real estate. I live in Northern Virginia. I help buyers buy and sellers sell residential real estate here in the area. If you are tuning in from another part of the country, welcome. Love to have you. Our content is applicable to most everything across the states. If you are looking for a fantastic agent in your area, feel free to reach out to us. We have a national agent referral network where we can connect you with 2 or 3 of your top superstar agents in your area that are going to give you fantastic advice for whatever you're looking to do, whether it be buy a property, buy a rental home, or do your first sale. So feel free for that at 703-829-LIST. Also, thank you to everyone who has subscribed to the show. If you are liking the episode today and you have not subscribed yet, please hit that button. It helps other people find the show and help spread our content. Feel free to send in comments and let us know what else you would like to hear about on the show. So I hope everyone is doing well. We have a fantastic topic today. We are going to be talking about rental properties. We haven't done a show like this before, and I'm super excited to pull in one of my associates and friends and superstar rental investor, Thaddeus Underwood. Thaddeus, if you want to pop in here and join us, there you are. Hi, good morning.
Hey guys, how you guys doing?
Great. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I wanted to welcome you to the show. And, one day Thaddeus and I were just talking in the office, and I realized he had a very healthy portfolio of rental properties, and he was a rental specialist. So I definitely wanted to pick his brain a little bit today about kind of how he got started in rental properties and how he manages them, and different tips that he can give to people out there that are thinking about starting to build their portfolio as far as rentals. And I just like to give him a warm welcome to the show. And Thaddeus, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the rental talk. Whatever you'd like us to know.
All right. So I was born on August 27th.
Okay. Maybe not that far back.
First of all, Elizabeth, thanks for having me. It's
Absolutely.
I'm excited to be on the show today. I love talking about all things real estate, and rental properties are one of those things that they're very good, but they're not very sexy. So whenever I get an opportunity to talk about it, I'm always like, oh, this is great. So, but no, I got into the real estate game long time ago. I'm a retired Army officer, and got into rental investing right when I graduated from college, and I've been doing it for bought my first house in 1998. So do the math on that, however many years that is.
You got into rentals right after college.
Like 2 years after I graduated from college in 1996 and bought my first rental property in 1998. So yeah, I was like 24 years old. Yeah.
That's incredible. I don't think a lot of people don't start that young usually.
Yeah, I had a lot of great mentors. So believe me, I wasn't some like savant that was like, oh, I've got this like grand idea. Like I'm so smart. It was more of a lot of people older than me were like, hey, you should do this. And I was like, okay, well, you're much older than me and worked out for you. So that's a good idea. I'm going to do it. So.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's a tip right there. Start young.
Yeah, start early, start young, do it often. But yeah, retired from the Army, accumulated a rental portfolio, and then got into real estate as an agent and broker because I was helping a lot of my friends who knew I was an investor, and they would come to me for help. And I had a friend who was a realtor, and I would go through all the things that you would normally look at, like, hey, make sure that if you're going to keep this at a rental when you leave, who are you going to rent it to? Buy close to, metro lines, or, looking at commuting patterns and school districts, if you have kids and all those types of things. And, in the process of doing that, advice, referred a lot of people to my friend who was a realtor. And I finally called him and was like, hey, I think I'm just going to get my license because I'm kind of doing what you do. I'm just not showing the houses. So that's how I got into it, from transition from investor to agent. And then here I am today.
Very nice. Very nice. So I think we should take a step back and talk a little bit about why we would even consider investing in real estate as rentals. Because I think a lot of people just, when they're starting out, they're buying their first place to live in, usually as their first purchase. They're not starting to purchase as a rental. So let's talk a little bit about that. And a good first step is purchasing for your first primary. And then as you need to expand and move up, potentially keeping that first property as a rental, right? That's the way I think a lot of people start.
Yeah, and that's the easiest way to do it, because if you're living in the home and you're buying it as a primary primary home, you get to live in the home, you get to find out all the quirks about the home, what works, what doesn't, the maintenance issues the home may have. You learn about them because you live in the house. And then when you move, you get to keep that and move to your next place and buy another primary residence. Now, of course, that works a lot. It works great for me as a military person because I moved a lot. For someone who's staying in one location, people do it. They house hack. They live in one house for 6 months, fix it up, move to another one. So you can still do the same thing without having to move around, from city to city. But by doing that, I call it the get rich slow game. People say, why would you ever get into real estate? Real estate rentals, because you see an HGTV show about flipping. There's no HGTV show about the guy that owns a whole bunch of rental properties. He's doing really well, because that doesn't sell on TV, right? It's not sexy. It's like
right.
Our society. You see a reel, and everybody likes a 30-second reel. But if you ask somebody to read a book, they're like, the book's probably good, but the book's going to take me 4 days to read. The reel takes me 30 seconds to watch. So I kind of consider flipping versus rentals the same way. Everybody's excited about flipping properties. Not everybody's excited about renting properties because it's a slow process. And I call it get rich slow, but with a long-term, kind of forecast. That's why if you start this early, and I tell people, they're like, oh, but I'm already, older and I can't do it. And I'm like, no, there's never a wrong time to start. It is a long-term play, but just because you're starting at 35 instead of 25 doesn't mean you can't do it. So, but yeah, if you could do that, I tell a lot of people that are interested in investing, don't think you're going to become a millionaire in 6 months by buying rental properties. There's people that do it, but that's very uncommon. You're going to make a little bit of money, and you're going to create a real portfolio so that years from now, you've got a lot of properties and they're all bringing in money. And that's where you get the return on your investment long-term, generational wealth.
I think too that a lot of people, like you were saying, they want everything fast and they want everything kind of right away. But with rentals, at least especially in our area, I think if you can even just break even every month on a rental property, it's okay, because you're building equity right along the way. You can't expect to potentially, go into a rental property and make money your first month out unless you put a lot of money down.
Right.
Right. So there's a misconception, I think, sometimes of like, oh, the numbers don't make sense because I'm making $10 a month. Well, it might make sense in the long term because, like you're saying, it's a long-term run.
Well, and I even give people this example. And now I'm going to start doing math in my head. And they say, I'm a math major, but people say never do math in public.
Oh, you're a math major. I didn't know that. Okay.
So yeah, I'm a nerd. But so let's say, people say, oh, I'm going to buy this house and for illustrative purposes, my mortgage payment is $2,500 a month. But I've already saw the houses in this area or condos or townhouses rent for $2,000 a month. So they say, I don't want to buy this because if my mortgage payment is $2,500 and I'm only able to rent it for $2,000, that means I'm short $500 a month. So you take that $500 a month over a 12-month period, that's $6,000. And this actually happened to me. So my very first house I bought, I was 24 years old. Now I'm going to date myself.
Okay.
It was a $72,000 condo in Tampa, Florida. My mortgage payment was $650.
Wait, it was how much? 22,000?
72,000.
Oh, 72,000. Okay.
It's a 2-bedroom condo. My brother moved down to Florida. We moved in together, bought a house. Mortgage payment was $650. When I left, I wanted to keep it as a rental. But those 2-bedroom condos in my neighborhood at the time, this is like when I bought it in 98. So this is 2000. They were renting for $600 a month. In my mind, psychologically, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm losing $50 a month because my mortgage payment is $650, but I'm only able to rent it for $600. So $50 a month times 12 months in a year is $600. So it's like, oh, I lost $600. But the thing that people don't realize, and people always say it, but you almost need a numerical example. So of that $650 a month, when you first buy a house, most of your money is going towards the interest on the loan, property taxes.
Yep.
So probably about $600 of that was going towards mortgage interest and taxes, right? So you multiply that 600 times 12 months of the year. So that's $7,200. So because now that you get to deduct that mortgage interest plus your property taxes, plus now you can itemize other things that you can expense out, I would have reduced my taxable income by $7,000, $7,200, just counting the interest on the loan and the taxes. That's before I started itemizing other things, because now that I own a property, I can itemize more than just that. But if I just itemize that reduces my taxable income by that $7,200. So assume you're in the 20% tax bracket, and let's just round $7,200 down to $7,000 for illustrative purposes. 20% of that $7,000 would be $1,400.
Okay.
So I could have saved $1,400 in taxes that year, even though I spent, what did I say, $600? Because I was losing $50 a month over 12 months. So I didn't want to lose $50 a month over 12 months. But had I done that, I would have paid $1,400 less in taxes. So I really still would have been better off. But it's explaining that to people. They're like, oh, but I just can't. My rent is less than my mortgage payment, so I can't do it. I'm like, even if your rent is less than your mortgage payment, you got to look at the holistic plan of, hey, but you now get to itemize your, mortgage interest and taxes. If you rent it out, your HO fees, et cetera. So that's where I try to advise a lot of people getting into it. I was like, don't just look at that raw number of, is my mortgage going to cover is the rent going to cover my mortgage? Even if it doesn't, it can still be a good thing.
It could still be a good deal. Well, also sometimes I've explained it to people too, in as much as, let's say it's that $50 delta. Instead of taking $50 every month and putting it in your savings account at the bank or, into a CD, just think of it as you're putting it into your real estate portfolio, because the equity growth over time, over year after year after year, right, is going to significantly compound. So you can't let a small delta like that, you shouldn't let it hold you up. Because like you said, in your head, it's all in your head, right? But when you look at the implication on paper, like you were saying, with the tax strategies that rental properties provide, and then also with the equity build on top of that. So not only you're getting tax benefits, but someone else is paying your mortgage now, or most of your mortgage.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that someone else is paying your mortgage, because people ask me, they're like, should I buy a house? I'm like, oh, you're going to buy a house. They're like, what do you mean? I was like, you can either buy your house or you can pay for my house as a landlord, but you will buy a house.
Absolutely. It's so true. I think renters don't really think about that. Yeah. So buying is just, there's so many things. So passive income, right? When you get to that point where the rent exceeds your payment, building long-term wealth, and also tax advantages. Yeah. Three big, awesome things for doing.
Yeah. And I'll touch on one more thing. Like, you hear people say, but what if I buy this house and my property value goes down? It depends on what your goals are. If you're keeping this property long-term, then I don't care if the price goes up 10,000, then the market crashes and it goes down 10,000, because I'm mostly concerned about the rent I'm getting. And that's why I say get rich slow. You're going to charge X amount of rent and you're not planning on selling the house. So if the property value goes down, you're not losing money because you sold it at a loss. You're still renting it. So eventually the property value comes back up because the market cycles, right? So rent values traditionally over time go up, though. Your mortgage payment will be the same for 30 years. So while I lost $50 a month on that house, and I ended up selling it. So the end of that story was I sold it 2 years later. I think I made like $5,000 after fees and everything else. Yeah. And I was like, I made $5,000. I got out of that. Right. But I went back to, my brother still lived in Tampa, and I went back to visit him 2 years later. And those townhouses were selling for like maybe it wasn't 2 years later, maybe it was like 5 or 6 years later. They were selling for like $210,000. And I was like, I bought this at $72,000. They're selling for $210,000. and I was worried about losing $50 a month.
Yeah.
So, the rent would have eventually got to $650, then $7, then $750. So,
Yep.
but I didn't have, that was my first purchase. I didn't have a long-term outlook. So yeah.
Yeah. And that's such a good point. I don't know of anyone's rent that's ever gone down. I mean, ever. Maybe it'll stay the same, right? Year to year. But very rarely does a landlord call and go, "Oh, I have great news. Your rent's going down."
Right.
No, but to your point, Thaddeus, typically your payment is locked in, your mortgage payment. So as a landlord, you know that that's set, and you know the rent will stay set or will continually go up.
Exactly.
Right. So fantastic way to look at that. So I think some of this really is just thinking about it in a different way and getting yourself comfortable, right? With that, like you said, that uncomfortability of $50 a month, that it's really not. You have to take into to affect all the components.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit about choosing the right investment strategy. Because, there's a lot of, like you said, reels and excitement over Airbnbs and the short-term rentals. But we don't really see a lot of that excitement over the long-term rentals. And they're different strategies that can be imparted when you're doing rental property. So tell us a little bit about what you do and the strategy that you took and why.
Yeah. So I'm a very, very hard long-term rental guy.
Okay.
And I have friends that do short-term rentals, and they do very well financially. And I've got friends that even do medium-term rentals. I'll give you a good example for military people. In the military, you get stationed in DC coming from Texas. You get only a certain amount of time to find a property. And the military has a certain number of days. I'm old now. I retired in 2017. It used to be 10 days they give you to live in a hotel. They pay for your hotel fee. I think somebody told me it went up to 14 days now, but you get to come, live in a hotel while you find somewhere to live. Well, obviously, if you're just arriving, the process to close is 30 days, from the date you sign a contract on a house. So you're not going to be able to buy something and not live in a hotel for those, extra 20 days that you got past the 10 days the government paid for.
Right.
So you're like, okay, well, how do I manage that? Well, there are landlords now that instead of doing like short-term Airbnb weekend deals, they're doing like 2-3 month rentals. So they call them medium-term rentals because they're like, hey, I know there's a lot of people that want to move to the area. They want to learn about the area, find out about the schools and everything else. But they don't want to be in a hotel for 2 or 3 months. So I'm going to rent my house out for minimum 60, 90 days. A lot of people do it with travel nurses, right? So you have people that say, hey, I want to be the short-term rental person. And, I want to make a lot of money because I'm charging higher rates because people want to come in for 3-4 days. You got the medium-term rentals and then you got the long-term rentals. And each of them have their advantages. Short-term rentals tend to be more profitable, but you got more headaches, meaning you got constant turnover, and people say, oh, well, that's why I hire a management company to manage my Airbnb. Totally works. And that's good. But now you've got to factor in, not only are you paying the mortgage on that property, if it's an Airbnb, you're paying for all the utilities. You're also paying for internet. And I had a buddy that lives in DC and he kind of like, I was really wanting to get into it. And he was getting out of the short-term business. He said, the problem with Airbnb or short-term rentals is that he said he had a couple come in on a Friday night. I forget exactly where in DC his property was, but he said a couple come in Friday night. They were leaving Sunday morning. He said the washing machine at the place didn't work. But because people know they can go in and give negative reviews, because if something that your Airbnb isn't right, they can leave you a negative review. And if they complain about it, they always expect the host to either fix it immediately or at least give them some kind of credit back. He said, if you check into an Airbnb Friday night and you're leaving Sunday, are you really washing clothes? How many people go on a weekend trip to a hotel, check in Friday, leave Sunday? Nobody is doing laundry.
Just for the laundry, Thaddeus.
So it's like, I got you. Just because you had a Samsung washing machine, I wanted to stay here. So he ended up in a situation where these clients were complaining, said, hey, the washing machine doesn't work, because they were basically trying to get him to basically refund some of their money or give him a discount. And he was like, so here I am, like, well, are you really going to use a washing machine? Okay, I'll send somebody to fix it. But it was Friday night, and he knew if the emergency technician came out on a Saturday or Sunday, he was going to pay way more money to get an emergency
Yeah.
technician out to fix a washing machine. He ended up going to Home Depot, buying a washing machine, delivering it to the property, and putting a brand new washing machine in on Saturday so that he wouldn't get a negative review, and so that he didn't have to like go give them a $500 credit or whatever the credit was they were asking for.
Mm-hmm.
But he was like, you know, when you start getting into things like that, he was like, it wasn't worth the headache for me with the short-term rental clients, because they're always expecting this, and they know you're at the mercy of the rating they're going to give you when they leave. So he made a lot of money doing it, but he dealt with those type of headaches where he was like, it just wasn't worth it. The extra money I made for the short-term rental wasn't worth it. Move that over to long-term rental.
Mm-hmm.
Your tenant's going to move in. The washing machine breaks. Guess what? They're going to call you and say the washing machine broke.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to say, hey, I'm going to have an appliance company come out and fix it. They'll contact you to coordinate a date that works. That tenant's okay with a 2, 3, 4 day period while they're, because it may be their fault. They may say, hey, the technician could come tomorrow, but I'm not available tomorrow because I got to go work. And it's like, oh, well, let him know when you're ready and he'll come check it out. That tenant's okay with that because they just signed a 12-month lease. So if it takes 2 days to get a washing machine fixed, they're not upset about it. So, but you're going to make less money doing it that way. So I don't think one is better than the other. I think it's just, if you want to make a lot of money, it's sexy because everybody talks about short-term rentals. Mm-hmm. You can do it and deal with the headaches, or you're going to pay a management company a lot of money to handle those headaches for you, which now cuts into your money. Or you go the long-term rental route where you're like, hey, I'm going to make less money, but I'm not going to deal with the same level of headaches that the short-term rental guy does.
Right. Just like everything in life, right? If it more profitable, more headache, you know, less profitable, less headache. It just depends kind of what you want to do. And I think too, setting your goals is really important. Like, what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to achieve long-term wealth build? Are you trying to achieve passive income of a certain amount each month? Yeah. How much time do you have to invest in holding a portfolio, right? Because the Airbnbs they can be time intensive. Yes. Right. With getting cleaning companies out there, fielding calls, you know, where do I go in DC? And you're almost in you're almost running a little mini hotel.
Right.
Supplies, you're a concierge, you're checking in and out, you're making sure the cleaning works. Like to your point, the clients now know, the Airbnb clients now know, if one little thing is wrong, if we complain, we'll get our money back. Yeah. You know, and they're looking for that because, you know, it's an easy way for them to get a free vacation. So
exactly.
I think too, like there's a lot of, and I haven't really followed it, but a lot of reels and whatnot about the Airbnb business possibly getting oversaturated. So just know your market, understand your goals.
Yeah.
And pick the right investment strategy for you.
Yeah. And so you just hit on something about pick the right market. Like DC is a great example. DC changed the laws, and I can't remember if it was 2020 or 2021, but basically the laws changed. It said, in order for you to do short-term rentals in DC, you have to be an owner occupant of the property. So it works well if you got a 4-unit building and you live in one unit and you rent the other 3 out. If you own a single-family home that you were Airbnb, well, I keep saying Airbnb, I should quit advertising for that company. Short-term rental.
Short-term rental, right? There's other companies besides that one.
Short-term rental market. You could no longer, and a lot of people bought investment properties in DC to do short-term rentals. Right. And when the laws changed and said, hey, for you to do a short-term rental, you have to be an owner occupant. And the reason they did that, I'm convinced, you know, and maybe I'll get hate mail for this from the hotel lobby. I'm convinced that maybe the hotel lobby said, hey, we're losing money because people are doing short-term rentals instead of hotels. Mm-hmm. The official message from DC was, hey, there's not enough affordable housing for long-term rental affordable housing for people in DC because so many landlords are doing short-term rentals. You know, we don't have enough housing for the people that want to do, you know, long-term rentals. And that may have been the case, but I'm sure there's probably a mix of both, right? A lot of people were doing short-term rentals. The hotel lobby was losing money, so maybe there's a mix of both of those. But the biggest piece is if you were an investor and you had bought a property that you specifically wanted to do short-term rentals for, and now your whole calculation of why you bought it, how much money you put down, how much you projected to make, et cetera, was based on the short-term rental market. And now you can no longer do it because the laws changed. now you're kind of like, oh shoot, what do I do now? So I always advise people, even if you plan to do short-term rental or medium-term rental, have a plan for each. Like, I want to do short-term rental, but if I had to convert this to a long-term rental, could I do it and would the numbers still work for me? And if the answer is no, you don't have any control over the laws and what's going to happen. Same thing with HOAs. HOAs started getting complaints and condo associations about short-term rentals, and a lot of HOAs and condo associations started outlawing any rentals less than 90 days. And now you might have bought in a condo building and thought you were going to do short-term rental, and now you can't do it because the HOA rules changed. So just got to be cognizant of those things.
Yeah, that's a great point. The rules change. You got to be able to be flexible and have your plan B kick into action.
Yeah.
So that kind of leads us into finding the right property, right? You touched a little bit on single family homes, condos, there's townhomes, beach properties down in Florida. I mean, if someone's just starting out, what are some things they should think about in terms of like finding the right property, or things that they should consider analyzing markets, rental demand, that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, you mentioned in one of the previous comments, like, are you buying because you want, residual income or because you want appreciation? That's one of the biggest things, is what's your goal? Is your goal to make money each month and have a stream of income coming in? Is your goal to buy a property and sell it 5 years from now and hope it appreciates and you cash out and make a lot of money? Because generally you're going to do one or the other. You're going to either find a property that has, a decent amount of rental income each month, the difference between your mortgage payment and the rent payment, and you're making, few $100s, you get to a point making a few $1,000s, depending on where you buy, over your mortgage payment. Or you're going to find a property where you're not making a lot of money each month, but it's in a very desirable area where property values are appreciating. And you know that even though you're not making a lot of money each month, 5 years from now, if you decide to sell it, or 3 years, you're in an area where you can cash out and make a lot of money on the back end. So, what's your exit strategy? If you got a 5-year exit strategy, you don't need to make a lot of monthly rental income on the property because you got a 5-year exit strategy and you're going to sell it for a lot. If you got a long-term hold strategy, I'm hoping that I can get to a point where there's a lot of rental income coming in on this house. Rarely do you get a property that gives you both. And if you can, call me, let me know, because I'm the one there. It's usually one or the other, but as you're choosing that, you got that goal and you figure out which one you want to do. But the other thing is, like, you'll hear people say, should I buy a condo? Should I buy a townhouse? Should I buy a single family home? And there is no, or should I buy a multifamily? That's the biggest thing. People are like, oh, you got to get in the multifamily business. Got to go multifamily. That's the way to go. And I always tell people, like, I don't know, if you buy a 4-unit building, there's a lot of 4-unit buildings in DC. And if you're an owner occupant, you live in one, you rent the other 3 out, it's great. But if you were to buy a 4-unit building, all of your tenants are generally in DC. I've never seen a 4-unit building that had all 3-bedroom, 2-bath units in it. Usually if it's a multifamily building, the units in the building are 1 or 2 bedroom units. And so now you're generally going to get, professional people who are, they only need a 1 or 2 bedroom unit. You're not going to get a family of 4 to rent a 1-bedroom, unit in your 4-unit building. So, but if you were like, hey, I don't want to deal with, 4 groups of 4 people, 4 families and, 16, 4 times 4 is 16 people in a building. I'd rather just have, 4 individual units with 4 individual people. Okay, now I'm dealing with, 4 people with less wear and tear on the unit versus a townhouse where you might get a, family of 4 or 5, and it's a lot more wear and tear on your property, but you're probably going to get a higher rate for that townhouse than you would for that 1-bedroom, unit in a multi-family building. So it's not better or worse. It just kind of depends on what you want to do. The multifamily building has 1 roof, so you're dealing with 1 roof. There's 1 yard. There's 1 yard. But at the same time, the single family home, or if you were to buy 4 specific condos in a building, okay, well, you're still not worried about the roof. You got a condo association that pays for the roof, but you could buy 4 condos in 1 building and maybe achieve the same thing you would have done by buying a 4-unit multifamily building. So I tell people it's not one is better than the other, but I just always hear people say, oh, you got to get into the multifamily game. And I own multifamilies, by the way. So I'm I'm not saying it's a bad. I own single families, I own condos, I own
Okay.
townhouses, multifamilies, but it's just what you want to do.
Also, you need to take into effect a single family home is going to need a lot more maintenance and upkeep than a condo. So
Right.
so when you're selecting tenants, right, for these different units, you need to make sure they're going to be aware, like they're going to mow the grass or they're going to let you know when something's happening with the roof is leaking or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
I think we had tenants one time where every time we talked to her, everything was great. Oh, the condo's great. Everything's great. Everything's great. And then we went to see it and it wasn't great. I was like, there's a leak here. There's dry rot there. This is broken. I mean, so right, as a landlord, you also have to keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on within the confines of your property, because sometimes the tenant's view of what's good or not good or broken or not broken, or something might be broken, but to them they don't use it, so they don't care. But
Yeah.
now, right, your asset may be depreciating because it needs
Right.
repair.
Right.
So even if you have a property management company, I think it's wise to go visit your own rental properties every 6 months, every 12 months,
Mhm.
and see for yourself
Yeah.
because through the eyes of the tenant is not necessarily what you're going to see through the eyes of the landlord.
You're exactly right. That's a
Right?
great point.
Yeah. Do you have any stories like that where
Oh
you
yeah, I had a tenant
by
that she was concerned that I was going to raise her rent, so she would never tell me anything went wrong because she felt, oh well, if he has to come fix something at the property, then when it's time to renew my lease,
Oh,
and she was in my property, I think probably over like 8 years, but
yeah.
and then the only time I would find out something needed to be really repaired was when I would do my inspection. So I usually go through
Exactly.
like once every 6 months, like you were saying. You
Mhm.
got to either you or your property manager's got to physically put some feet inside the house. But
Right.
that was when I would find out things were wrong, because she was always afraid that if she reported something wrong, I was going to potentially raise her rent. And I was like, hey, I want you to be in a safe home, and a home that is not falling into disrepair. And if you don't tell me when it happens, guess what? It gets worse, because if there's a drip underneath the sink that
Yeah.
continues to drip, is going to eventually cause more problems. So I had to explain, like, let me know when it goes wrong. When something happens, I will fix it.
Yeah.
Like, but
I
you're
want to
exactly right.
fix
You got to get
it.
into the house.
Yeah. It's almost the reverse. It's almost like I don't want you as a tenant unless you're going to tell me what's wrong. So don't
Right.
be afraid to tell me because your rent's going to go up because you could lose your spot anyway. You know what I mean? So
Right.
they don't they think the thinking is different.
Yeah.
And this kind of leads us into our next slide, managing rentals like a pro. So you had mentioned property management companies as an option to help watch over properties versus someone trying to do it on their own. Because sometimes people live in the DC area and want to turn their home into a rental, but they're moving out of the area.
Mhm.
So that would be a perfect example of when you would want to pull in a property management company.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, if you have lived in a property for a couple of years, and this will be key for anybody who's thinking about getting into rental properties. If you can live in the property first, there's three people you need to know. You
Okay.
need to know a good plumber, you need a
Mhm.
good electrician, and you need a general handyman. Like, those are the three things. Like, anything that happens with your property is going to be some kind of electrical problem, something with a power light switch or something went out. It's going to be a plumbing problem. There's a leak in the faucet, or it's going to be a general repair problem, like a door came off the hinge or a window won't close. General handyman can fix that, right? So if you meet those three people while you live in the property, and this is what I did. I would buy a house, live in it for 2 or 3 years, move to my next location, buy another house, live in it for 2 or 3 years. But each time I moved, I would meet those three people, right? Because now when I left, I actually self-managed my properties.
Okay,
Because
smart.
if the tenant called and said your sink's leaking, I called my plumber that I already knew and said, hey, can you go over to the house and fix the sink? There's an electrical problem. I called the electrician. So if you have the added benefit of being able to live in the property, and you can
Mhm.
meet those three people that you trust, because you can always go online and call, go to Yelp or whoever, and find a plumber, an electrician, or carpenter. But if you have actually had the opportunity to meet those people and trust them, where you say, hey,
Yeah.
you've been to my house, you fixed something for me before, if anything happens again while I'm gone, I'm going to call you to be the plumber who goes back to the house or the electrician that goes back to the house. Then it's a lot easier for you to self-manage. I lived in Japan for 2 years and managed my rental portfolio from Japan. But I had people in place where all my rental properties were. And I would tell the tenants, anything happens, let me know.
Yep.
I would send a message to my contractors, fix this, send me the invoice, and we're good. And I said, if you can't get in touch with me, I gave them my contractors' names. I said, if you can't get in touch with me, just call them directly. They'll still come fix it, and then they'll invoice me. So you can self-manage if you are confident enough and comfortable enough to have a group of people that you can call to do that. But some people don't want to. So I also do property management for other people. And often people say, hey, Thaddeus, I appreciate you, educating me and letting me know that that's an option for me. But I don't want the tenants to call me. I don't want the call in the middle of the night. I don't want to deal with if the tenant's complaining. And so I also manage properties for other people. And usually those are people that are like, hey, I appreciate you trying to save me a little money, telling me I could do it myself. But I'd rather not do it. And that's one less phone call I've got to take. Or they've got super busy lives. And they're like, hey, my job doesn't afford me the opportunity to start dealing with like rental problems. So I'm willing to pay for that. So, but if you find a property manager, get somebody that you trust. Don't just go and say, oh, this property management company, I found them online. Like, talk to the property manager and find out what they provide. Because you mentioned earlier walking through the property. So for all of the people I manage properties for, I'm going through at least 3 times a year. I'm going through when they sign the lease, I'm going through at the 6-month mark, and then I'm going through at the 12-month mark. Not all property management companies do that. A lot of them just come when the tenant says there's a problem. So, I'll even do a video of the house if there's something wrong. I'm not just going to tell you, hey, there's a hole in the wall. It's like I'm going to do a video and send it to you on YouTube so that they can say, oh, well, here's what Thaddeus was talking about. So you just got to make sure you select a good property manager if you choose to go that route.
That's excellent. Are you still taking on new clients?
I am. And I do most of what I do through referrals. So if anybody watching your
I know, right?
needs a property manager, give me a call. I'm happy to help you out. Oh, but here's the other thing. I'm glad you asked that. I will only manage properties, and not everybody does this, because property managers, a lot of times it's like, hey, if I can just get a bunch of properties that I manage, I can make a lot of money. I do it because I'm the crazy guy who actually loves it. People are like, you like property management? I love, as you can probably tell from this podcast, I love talking to people, right? So, so for me, I don't mind dealing with the tenant problems. I'm okay. I actually enjoy that. But as you're figuring out what you want to do regarding the people that are going to be your property management team, you got to have those people that want to do it, because you don't want somebody that hates dealing with tenants and now they're your property manager. They're not dealing with your tenants. They're also not telling you what's going on. So, find somebody who really likes to do it. That's important.
I think that's very important. So I have had a couple calls from homeowners that were ready to sell their home. And, they would call me and say, I had no idea the disarray that the shape that my property was in. I had a property management company. I've been renting it out. I haven't personally been walking it. I didn't think to ask the property management company to inspect it every couple months. Like they kind of think when they sign up, as landlords sign up with a property management company, the property management company is going to do the right thing and they're going to be professional and they're going to do a good job. And sadly, I have found that that's not always the case, and more so not the case than is the case. So I'm so glad you're offering a great service out there, because there is a big lack in the market. And just like you said, Thaddeus, if property management companies get people to sign up, they're typically making money every single month, whether or not they need to do anything at the property. So sometimes they don't do anything. They just, they get lazy and they have 50 clients and they're doing amazing, but they're not really doing the work. So as a landlord, again, I always suggest keep your pulse on what's going on with your own property, whether it's talking to your property management company every couple months. Hey, have you walked it? Can you send the video? What's going on? Or going in yourself and just making sure you know what's going on, because it's your asset at the end of the day.
No, you're exactly right. And some landlords, I've refused to manage properties for people before, because, you get the landlord that's like, I want to minimize the amount of money I spend. I don't want to spend any. And I'm like, well, here's what I'm going to recommend. I'm going to recommend at least twice a year you get your HVAC system service, once in the spring, once in the fall.
Mhm.
I'm going to recommend that once a year you get your dryer vent cleaned, because these are all like safety related things. It's going to prolong the life of your HVAC. It's going to prevent potential fires from your dryer. So if I have landlords that are like, oh, well, I don't want to spend money on that, just let's only service the HVAC if there's a problem, or I don't want to do the dryer vent cleaning, like just wait until there's an issue. I've turned clients away because you now become, because they're not interfacing with the tenant, right? I'm the one that's interfacing with the tenant. So I'm like, I want your tenant to know that you care about your property and that you're willing to spend money to keep your property nice for them to live in. So if you're telling me only spend money when we absolutely have to, then I would recommend you go with another company that's willing to do that, because it's my reputation as a property manager as well. You know, they don't necessarily look at you as the owner who won't pay for it. They look at me as a property manager who's telling them no. So, you know, as a property manager, I tend to not work with people who don't want to spend money to keep their properties nice.
Good for you, Thaddeus. I mean, you have to do that. You have to, like you said, it's your reputation. You're doing the right thing. You love talking to the tenants. You want to make sure everyone's safe and there's no fires and, you know, everything's up and running well. I want to circle back onto one thing that we didn't touch on, but I think for me, I think it's extremely important that when you're screening tenants, you slow down and take the time not to rush into taking your first or second applicant, but really placing the right people in the rental home. And how does that impact you as the owner and as the property manager, even just the tenant selection?
That I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that is such a key part, you know, before we even get to me loving to do it or the landlord willing to spend money, right? So going back to where you were talking about how do you select the right property to buy, you to take that same thing now to the tenant. How do you select the right tenant? And so as you mentioned about, you know, not selecting the first tenant that comes along. So people will do that because they're so pressed, like my house is vacant, I got to get a tenant in. But if you select the wrong tenant and 3 months later you have to evict them, now you're going another month while you're waiting for another tenant. So that time and energy spent up front to get the right tenant is key to make sure that you don't end up in a situation where 3 months later you're evicting them. And so I always advise my landlords, set some criteria, and everybody's criteria is different, but a common one that I'll use, and it depends on where you're at in the world too, right? So let's just say in DC, you say, I want you to have income of at least 4 times the monthly rent and a credit score of at least 720. So some people say 3 times the monthly rent and a credit score of at least 650. You know, you set whatever criteria you want as a landlord, but by setting that, and you advertise that to tenants up front, because what you don't want is a tenant that says, I paid a $50 application fee, you turn me down.
Right.
Oh, because your credit score is 600 or your credit score is 580. Well, had you told me that before I applied, I wouldn't have spent the $50 applying. So it's very important that you lay those things out up front so that people don't apply, because they're like, oh, they want a credit score of 720. My credit score is not 720. And it's not necessarily always a bad thing if the credit score is not high, if the reason is not high is something like this. Okay, I'll give you a good example.
Okay.
My credit score is somewhere between 815 and 820 right now. So I have great credit, happy camper, all that good stuff, right? I remember when I was in grad school, I went to the dentist and I forget what it was. It was a fluoride treatment or something. And whatever it was, when I went in, I was like, hey, if there's anything outside the scope of what my insurance covers, let me know in advance. They were like, yeah, we'll never charge you for anything that's not covered by your insurance without notifying you first. I was like, great. 2 years later, I'm looking at my credit report. I've got a collection against me. And I'm like, whoa. Like, I've always prided myself on having great credit. And my credit score was, and it wasn't even low. It was like in the low 700s. But I was always like an 800 plus credit guy. I'm like, wait, why is my credit score in the 700s, right? I go and look, and I'm like, oh, there's a collection against me. And it's from this dentist in New York City where they gave me a fluoride treatment. And they didn't tell me that was extra cost. So I ended up getting it off my credit report. Credit report went back up. But like if somebody were to want to rent me a home and they said your credit score must be 760 or higher, and I'm making that number up, but they would have been like, oh, well, your credit score is 720. We don't want to rent to you. But it wasn't because I didn't pay bills. Like that was the one thing. But when you have a collection on your credit report, that looks negative, right? It's a collection, right? So I always tell my landlords, if you see a credit score that's lower than what you want, let's look at the why, because you're going to get that credit report. And that credit report is going to say, they paid bills on time or didn't pay bills on time. They got X amount of outstanding credit. Their credit utilization rate is X, Y, or Z or whatever. So if it's low because of like a medical collection bill on a bill that somebody's disputing, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But in general, you want somebody with a pretty decent credit score, a pretty decent income. And let's assume that your house is renting for $3,000 a month. It's not specifically in the DC area. It's not unrealistic to expect that person to make 4 times the monthly rental income. So that's $12,000 a month cumulative between everybody in the household. It's not just that each person's got to make 12,000. You're just saying as a whole, I'm expecting the couple or family or whoever that lives in this house to have a combined income of at least 4 times the monthly rent. In DC, $12,000 a month isn't unreasonable. Like, there's a lot of people making more than $12,000 a month. So if you said, I want to rent this house out for $3,000 a month, I'm expecting you to have income of at least $12,000 a month gross. Most people, that wouldn't knock out a bunch of people, is my point. So if you start setting criteria like that, you're going to avoid getting the person who can't, pay the rent and you're having to evict them. And I'll tell a lot of tenants, because I do property management, for my own properties. I say, hey, this isn't me being a mean person. This is, I don't ever want to have a conversation about why you couldn't pay rent. And if I am allowing you to rent this property and you may be financially strained to pay the rental payment, then I did you a disservice as a landlord by putting you in a situation where you're renting a property where you're strained to pay the rent payment. So, when you explain that to tenants up front, they don't look at you as, oh, you're the bad person, you won't let me rent. Is, oh, he's actually helping me out by telling me, we don't want the uncomfortable conversation about why you didn't pay rent this month.
Just like you said up front, you don't want to rush into something and then 3 months later have to evict them and then start the process all over again. You're going to just slow down, wait for the right applicant to come in, place them in the property, because once they're in, it's very, very, very difficult to bring them out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right? It's so easy to put someone in, but bringing them out is difficult. So you want to make sure that's the right fit.
Yeah. No, you're exactly
right.
That's
a big one. And then let's talk about, some common pitfalls that maybe you can help people avoid. So one of them is screening the tenants properly, I should say. And just like you said, Thaddeus, I mean, you're really doing them a disservice if you let someone rent a property that is going to be a struggle for them to pay financially month after month. They really should be looking at a different price point.
Yeah.
For themselves.
Yeah.
What other vacancy factors? I know you touched a little bit on that. How do you try to how do you work it when a tenant's going to be moving out? Do you start advertising your property for rent while they're still in there? How do you kind of feel the transition between tenants?
Yeah, no, that's a key piece, is the whole advertising while tenants are there, because in the lease and I'll just use Virginia because that's a very common one. We do a lot of business here in Virginia. Mm-hmm. There's a clause in the lease that says if the landlord decides to sell the property, they can start showing that property for sale up to 90 days before the lease ends. If a landlord decides to rent the property, they can start showing it for rent up to 60 days prior to the lease ending. Every tenant signs that lease, and it's got that language I just described.
Right.
But when you get ready to sell or rent your property as a landlord and you call the tenant and say, hey, you're moving out in 60 days, I'm going to show the property for rent. A lot of tenants are like, wait, well, I'm not comfortable with people coming in the house while I live here, or no, I really don't want people coming in the house. And so I always have to remind tenants, remember when you were looking for a property to rent?
I like that.
Was there someone living in the house when you were looking for it? And they were like, yeah. I was like, remember they were okay with you coming in and looking at the property while they lived there? So now this is just you on the other side of that equation. Somebody else wants to rent it. They want to come look at it. It's like, you weren't worried about stealing somebody's stuff out of their house when you were looking for rentals. I was like, nobody's going to come through and start looking to steal your stuff because, I said, they're going to be with a licensed real estate agent. Mm-hmm. So they're not just going to be roaming through your house, by themselves. But you can't tell a tenant that at the 60-day mark before their lease ends, because it's shock. Even though they signed that lease, that lease is like 12 pages long. I promise they didn't sit down and comb through every paragraph in the lease, right? And so as a landlord or property manager, a lot of times you got to find those key things like that when the tenant moves in and say, hey, just to make sure you're cool with this, when it's time for your lease to end, the landlord may decide to sell this property. They may decide to rent it. Either way, it's going to be 90 days out or 60 days out that they can start showing it for rent. Make sure that you remember that, so that when that time comes, we're not having an awkward conversation about you telling me you don't want to let people into the house while you still live here. Or I work from home and I telework and I've got a dog and it's too much trouble for me to, put my dog in a crate or walk my dog every time. Yes, but we're going to have to figure that out. And I want to have that conversation at the lease start date versus 60 days before you move out. So again, that's why your property manager is so important. If your property manager is not having that conversation with your tenant and they just say, hey, you signed the lease says this. Yeah, the tenant can't really argue about it because they did sign the lease, but they're also like, it would have been good for you to make sure I knew that, like when I signed the lease, so that I was at least prepared for it. So that's one thing I would say, like, as far as like getting, preparing your tenants for when their time to move out comes. And then like hire a realtor. Everyone, I didn't realize this. So many people don't realize a realtor can help you find a rental property. Now, I blame that on realtors too, because a lot of realtors are like, I don't want to do rentals. I have a lot of clients who I've helped find rentals who turned into buyers a year later because they were like, hey, we're going to rent for a year, then we're going to buy. But a lot of realtors, if somebody asks a realtor to help them find a rental, a lot of realtors are like, oh, I don't do rentals. So a lot of tenants don't even realize you can hire a realtor to help you find a place. But if you're an investor and you're trying to find a rental property to invest in, hire a realtor and say, hey, I'm thinking about investing and buying a property, but I don't know what properties rent for in this area, because I know if I put 20% down at this purchase price, here's what my mortgage payment will be. I just don't know how much people are getting for rent in that neighborhood. That's where your realtor comes into play. So it's easy for us, as you know, I can go pull data for any neighborhood or any city and say, in this neighborhood in the last 6 months, here's everything that's rented. So that buyer knows before they even buy, like, this is what properties are renting for. So if you're buying it as an investment property, here's what you're going to be able to get. Or a lot of my owner occupants that are like, we're going to buy it, live in it for 2 years. I have people that as soon as they buy a house, I set them up on a rental search. So anything that comes up in their neighborhood for rent, the whole 2 years they're living there, they're getting emails every time something comes up for rent. So by the time they leave and decide to rent it out, they've been looking at rentals going on in the neighborhood for the whole 2 years they live there, because I've been sending them rental listings on an auto search the whole 2 years they live there. So
that's really smart.
Yeah. So hiring a realtor, that's where the key of hiring a realtor, and people don't understand the importance of it, is can make your life so much easier as an investor. Now, if you're a realtor investor, it's even easier, right? Because I don't have to call another person to do it. I'm doing it for myself. But hire a realtor. And the same thing with, like, where do you buy and how do you know about vacancy? I'll a lot of times say, you and I know, we can go see how many days it takes to rent a property. So if I say in Cameron Station, Alexandria, Virginia, that's where one of my rental condos is, I want to see everything that's rented in that neighborhood and how many days on market did it take to rent. Well, if I see everything that goes up for rent in that neighborhood is getting a rental contract or application signed within like 4 or 5 days of going on the market, I know that's a very hot community. And I'm like, wow, if you buy there, you're probably not going to have your property on the market for a long time before it rents. You also probably will not be able to get a very good deal in that neighborhood because it's in such high demand. So don't think you're going to go to a neighborhood where everything rents in 3 days and get a deal. Conversely, don't go buy the house where you're like, oh my God, I got this great deal. And you find out all the properties in that neighborhood usually take 60 to 90 days to rent. And you're like, I got a steal on this house, but it's going to take me 3 months to get a tenant. But that's where the realtor can go do that for you and tell you, like, this is a very high demand rental area because everything rents within 7 days or less or something like that. So as a landlord, you want that data before you buy to be able to say, I know I'm buying somewhere where the rental market is going to support me purchasing this home.
That's a good point, because like you said, a lot of people don't realize realtors can assist tenants looking to be placed in a rental home, and they can also assist landlords looking to advertise their home for rent. So agents kind of do a lot. But I think a lot of people forget that on the rental side. They think it's more of like a Craigslist thing or just a sign in the yard or that kind of thing. But you can do it professionally that way as well. All right. Anything else you wanted to touch on today? I think we hit on a lot of great points.
I guess the last couple of things I would say is like you're not buying a $1,000 bicycle or $40,000 car. Homes are like significant purchases, and I feel like if there's ever a time where you want to spend a little bit more money to do your due diligence, buying a home is the time to do it. So hiring a good accountant. So when you start doing rental properties, if you got one rental property, probably not that big of a deal. You can use TurboTax, right? But at some point, like I've got 19 rental properties at this point, and they're in multiple states. So
okay,
I consider myself a pretty smart guy, but I'm not a CPA. So I'm like, hey, there's somebody that gets just like you couldn't go walk yourself through the home buying process as a buyer and expect to know everything. That's why you hire a realtor. So I always tell my investors, you're not an accountant. So I know you think you can do your taxes on TurboTax yourself, and you probably can up to some point, but you're going to get to a point where your rental assets, your investments through the stock market, your retirement accounts is going to become too much. So pay the money to hire the people who have the skill set to do what you need. So pay to hire a good accountant. Don't just go to, the local tax office or the local strip mall tax center. Hire an accountant. Hire an attorney. Like if you want somebody to look over contracts or look over leases and things you don't understand, a real estate agent can explain the lease to you. But if there's specific clauses, what do we call it? UPL, unauthorized practice of law. Like I'm not an attorney. So when it gets beyond like the basic, tenets of that lease, I'm going to tell you, you may want to contact an attorney for that. I mean, I got lucky because I married an attorney, so my wife does all that for me. But hire an attorney, hire an accountant, hire the people who are skilled to do the things that you need them to do, because you are making a significant investment when you start buying real estate. And I think part of that is why it's so daunting for people is you don't do this all the time. Like people buy a car every 4 or 5 years or whatever. So they're used to going to the car dealership and buying a car, and they're used to upgrading cell phones every 2 years. But a house isn't something you do very frequently. So I think people look at it and say, it's not something that I understand. It's too hard to do. So I'm not comfortable. But that's why you hire a realtor, an accountant, and CPA and an attorney. But I think if you do those things, it doesn't become as daunting as people think it is. They can be successful in investing in real estate.
Absolutely. Surround yourself with professionals. And, Thaddeus, thank you so much for also sharing that you do property management, because I think that's a really critical element for people starting out. They may be intimidated by like, okay, well, I don't mind owning one, but I'm scared about all the repairs, or like, how do I manage that? So tell us how people can reach out to you if they'd like to chat with you more.
Yeah, so obviously List with Elizabeth is your go-to person for all things real estate. But if I can help you with anything else, specifically property management, or you just got general questions about, I'm happy to share my experience about being a landlord. I've got good, I've got bad. I'll tell you one more story and then I'll let you go.
Please, yes.
We were talking about leases and making sure that you get the right tenants doing the right things. I manage a property for owner or landlord in Arlington. It's a 4-bedroom, 4-bath townhouse. So as you know, Elizabeth, it's expensive to live in Arlington, right?
Yes.
So if I'm a single person trying to rent a 1-bedroom condo, it's a lot cheaper if I can get 3 other friends to go in with me and find a 4-bedroom townhouse, especially if it's got 4 bedrooms and 4 baths, because we all now have our own bedroom and bathroom. So this particular rental was a 4-bedroom, 4-bath, and 4 single guys in their early 20s, all, young professionals, white collar jobs, consultants, one of them was actually an accountant. So they moved into the house and my landlord's like, hey, Thaddeus, like it's 4 single guys in their early 20s. Like it's going to turn into a frat house. I was like, no, that's why we go through and we walk through to make sure they don't damage your house.
Yeah.
Well, he was like, but I just don't want them partying. He's like, so can I put the clause in there? Like, I don't want any loud partying after hours and I don't want any kegs. And I was like, we can put anything you want in the lease, because we can be more restrictive than what the lease has as long as they agree to it. So he actually put a clause in his lease that said like no partying after like 12, which was already in the HOA, rules anyway. But then he put a second clause that said no kegs in the house. And the guys are like, he doesn't want us to have kegs. Does he think we're going to have kegs? I said, he doesn't know if you're going to have kegs, but he wants to make sure this doesn't turn into a frat house. So we actually wrote an additional addendum to their lease that says no kegs are allowed in the house. And that was his way of saying, therefore, in his mind, 4 frat boys moving to a house. But he was like,
right,
we will not allow partying in his house. And we just put an addendum in that said no kegs allowed in the house or whatever. So those are the types of things that landlords can do to make sure they're further protected. But hire a property manager that's going to do those things for you and have those conversations. But you can reach me at the information on the screen here, and I'm happy to share any experiences I have that might help anybody else.
Great. Thaddeus, thank you so much. Are you going to go for 20? You said you have 19. Are you going to go for 20?
You know what's funny? So you keep dragging me on because I will talk. I will sit here all day, Elizabeth. This is
the last question. I promise.
No. You can ask me a question. I don't need to go anywhere. I'm good. But so I'm glad you asked that question because so many people, it's a number of properties. But the deal is, if you told me I could buy one property and make the same amount of money I'm making right now,
okay,
I'd buy one property.
You would have less. Yeah.
It's back to the whole, flipping houses, right? It sounds sexy, right? It sounds sexy a lot of times when people give the number of properties that they own because they're like, oh, now I'm up at 25 properties. Now I'm at 30 properties.
Yeah.
But if you told me I could have one property that paid the same amount of money as the 19 properties I have now, I'd sell them all and do one property.
Got it.
So, but am I stopping? And mine was a dollar amount. So some people do number of houses. Mine was a dollar amount. I wanted to get to a certain dollar amount. And when I hit that, I was like, oh, well, and then people want to know, like, because I'm a numbers guy. I'm like, well, what does that look like? I wanted to make $100,000 a year in passive income. And I hit that. And I was like, so what do we do now? Well, I was like, well, I guess the next thing to do is do that again. So then I think 2 years ago, I'm over $200,000 in net passive income. And that's the other thing. Like, remember, I started in 1998. So when people hear that, they're like, oh, Thaddeus, I'm going to go buy a bunch of properties. I didn't do that like in 2022. Yeah. I did that from 1998 till 2024. Now it's 2025. So, but set a numerical goal. Like, I want to make an extra $10,000 a year in passive income. And then that number obviously will go up over time, right? Because as you and I mentioned earlier, rent rates are going to go up. And not only is rent going to go up, eventually, of my 19 properties, 17 of them were paid off. So when you get to the point where you no longer have a mortgage on the property and your rent rates are going up, now all of a sudden it makes it even better because you're like, oh, well, my rent keeps going up and the property's paid off. So the $10,000 a year I wanted to make on this property obviously just got bigger and it keeps getting bigger. So I always advise investors, focus on a number. Like, I want to make X amount of dollars, not necessarily on X amount of properties, because if I could do the same thing with one property, I'd do it with one.
That's a great point. Well, thank you so much, Thaddeus, for your time today and sharing all of your knowledge. If anyone needs to reach Thaddeus, please feel free to reach out to him directly. If anyone has more questions on buying or selling residential property in the Northern Virginia area, give us a call at 703-829-LIST. We will see you all on the next show. Thank you, Thaddeus, and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
When you're ready to